still have in Catholicism. It's not just Catholicism. Protestants still have it too. Where do you think Easter, Christmas, and all these things came from? It came from Catholicism. Luther and all the guys of the Reformation, they got rid of some junk, but they kept a lot too. Okay? And we haven't been taught that. We weren't taught that. We think we're so far different from the Catholic religion as Protestants, and we're not. We are to some degree, but there's a lot of things that we've kept that go back to what we're going to talk about. So where does Good Friday, the Easter resurrection on a Sunday, where does all that come from? Is anybody wanting to learn, know that? Why do we do what we do? Where did it come from? Anybody? Yeah? You guys want to hear?
Yep.
All right. I'm going to try to develop this out. We're going to go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. It tells us on the fourth day of creation. You don't have to turn there in your Bibles. It's in your written part. On the fourth day of creation, God created the sun and the moon and the stars, and they were given for signs and seasons for days and years. But I want to focus on the signs, okay? What would be the aspect of the sun and moon or stars being created for signs to you and me?
The light.
The light. It says they are. One's a lesser light and one's a greater light. Signs. A picture of something, a story, a sign to tell us something. So God created them to tell man something. Now there's many times in the Hebrew Scriptures that tells us that the Messiah to come is like the sun. The sun is like the bridegroom. Okay, and we know that's referring to the one and only Messiah. But he also talks about the moon in comparison to the bride, Israel. Okay, the one and only true Israel. And God, it says, garnished the heavens. He gave names to all the stars. And today we have horoscopes and all these different things. I call them horoscopes. And that's all from Satan. Okay, your sign and all these things. That has nothing to do with God. And there's warnings about that in the Torah. But we as Christians, sometimes when we look at that, we have a holier-than-thou attitude, and we throw away the baby with the bathwater. That if God created the stars and the sun and moon for signs, there's nothing bad in the sun and moon and stars. If we begin to worship the creation of God, is what makes it bad, versus enjoying the creation of God and understanding why they were created. So we go back here because all of paganism, everything that is not a strict Torah Israeli religion passed on to us through Yeshua for Gentiles to be grafted in, anything that would be called pagan, goes back to the concept of the worship of the sun and the moon and the stars, even if they say they don't worship them literally. Because the concept is that the sun represents the male god, and the moon represents the female god, and the story of their union and picture through humanity is in the stars, the constellations. But the truth is that they speak of one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has one true Messiah. If you look at the stars, the pictures are there of the virgin birth. Leo, the line, is the line of the tribe of Judah. And these three books right here, we got the Gospel and the Stars. These are all written, most of these, I think two of them are written in the 1800s. You get some good stuff back then. And the original names that they have, going as far as they can go back to the stars, there is a story in the stars. And what better picture for anybody in the world that God created to look up in the heavens at night to understand. But how did everything get corrupted? Well, Jewish tradition states that Seth was the replacement for Adam and Eve for Abel. Remember Cain killed him? Seth was the new seed, and his family, his children, according to Josephus and other Jewish writings, that they were empowered by God to develop the concept of the constellations. Why do you think there's 12 constellations? Is it because you have a sign in the zodiac? Or maybe do they represent the tribes of Israel? Okay? You see, everything's been corrupted. Everything's been corrupted, and that sometimes as Christians we're afraid to even look at them because we think of the corruption and we miss something. We have to go through the corruption and get to the truth. But everything is tied into this. Now, if we go from Seth and we go forward, judgment came with the flood because man turned wicked. Okay? And then shortly after the flood, man turned wicked again, Nimrod in the Tower of Babel. You know the story? And God's, I think it was His grace that actually brought confusion in the languages. Okay? Because if He didn't do that, because of His mercy and judgment, He would have had to judge the people at the Tower of Babel like He did before with the flood. Okay? But He caused them to confuse their languages. And Nimrod had developed a religion, and you have many sheets, and you'll just have to search through this. In your picture, you have a picture of the Tower of Babel. Well, it's a depiction of it, possibly. It's on page 3 of your picture page. And it was not a tower that was going to be, they thought they could build it all the way up to God's throne and walk in and dethrone. Okay? They didn't think that. It was called a ziggurat, they've found through archaeology, and it was for to observe the stars, the sun and the moon, and they developed a religion and a worship of the sun and stars and the moon. And Nimrod developed this, and the whole world united to this. And so God brought this judgment of languages, and everybody spoke a different language, and they couldn't understand each other, so they went to where they could understand with the people that spoke their new language that they got. But they took with them the corruption at the Tower of Babel of the sun and the moon and the stars, the goddess, the god. There is no goddess. They took this corruption, and wherever they went with their culture and their language, they added traits and characteristics to their religion of the god and goddess, but it was the same thing. Everything traces back to the Tower of Babel. No matter how you look at it, everything will trace back there. But there was a guy named Abraham, or Avraham, or actually it was Abram at that time. And, he's a little bit concerned because God has promised him a seed, and him and Sarah haven't been able to fulfill that at this point. And in Genesis chapter 15, in referring to this promise, God tells Abram, He says, "Look now toward heaven and tell the stars." Now the Hebrew actually implies to interpret the stars. Interpret the stars. Okay? And it says later on, because Abraham looked at the stars and he interpreted them about his seed, the promise of his seed, the Messiah and all that, I believe he could see that in the stars. God revealed it to him. Because he believed, it says there in Genesis 15 that God accounted it to Abraham for righteousness. And who said that? Paul quotes that verse in Galatians chapter 3, talking about you and I having faith as Abraham did, that we are the children of Abraham if we believe in Yeshua as the Messiah. And he said, as the gospel was beforehand, I thought the gospel started in the New Testament. No, Galatians, Paul said, as the gospel was beforehand preached to Abraham, and he believed, and it was accounted for him for righteousness. So you see, something that Abraham saw in the heavens, that God revealed to him, he believed from that day forward about the promise of his seed, and this is the true understanding of the stars and the sun and the moon, and that was kept in to Abraham, who was a Hebrew, which I believe spoke Hebrew, and it was preserved in that language, and over time, even the Hebrews corrupted the religion. They brought in the paganism and all that.